In tonight's Dorchester segment, we catch up on the state of the Red Line and hear about dealing with traffic on Blue Hill Avenue. To fill us in is the news editor of the Dorchester Reporter, Jennifer Smith. Thank you much for joining us again, Jen.
Of course.
I want to start with the Red Line because this has been a terrible summer since around June 11th at least. And the mayor I think the mayor sort of said, hey, we've got to do better. Talk about that.
Yes. So as most people might remember, for the past few years, there's sort of been this question about how the mayor felt about the quality of transit. At one point, sort of semi-famously, he gently joshed some of the reporters who were asking about the status of it. And he said, well, look, the train runs pretty much smoothly, but you all make it sound like it's falling apart, crumbling into the depths of the ocean every time that something goes wrong, but it's generally fine. That all very much took a turn at June 11th when a Red Line train derailed, and we've still not caught quite up again with the normal standard of service. So what the mayor did just this week is actually write a letter to Secretary Stephanie Pollock saying, I'd like a few concrete changes to be made to sort of bolster Red Line service and make some other standards of service that run parallel to or complement it better. And one of these things was saying, there needs to be better and more frequent service on the Fairmount line. Now, the Fairmount line, as most people might be aware, is the only commuter rail line that operates entirely within the city of Boston, and it connects South Station all the way up down to Mattapan at this point, and then through onto Reedville. So when the Red Line was down, it offered an alternative to folks who would normally have to take the trolley and then the Red Line and then get all the way downtown. So he wants more service on that, and he'd like you to be able to use your Charlie cards to use the commuter rail on that line. Another thing he wants is for an extended amount of what was technically called a South Shore Limited or a South Shore Express, which was a commuter rail stop or a series of stops that was basically augmenting the Braintree line. And the last thing is he wants off-peak service to heighten on the Red Line, which he noted the MBTA is doing on the Orange Line, given the new casino and the demands around that. So we'd like to see that on the Red Line as well. So all of these asks are very much geared not just toward improving service in general, but the fact that the Red Line is still not up to the standards that we need it to be and won't be until at least Labor Day.
I'm trying to put this into perspective. I mean, I saw the press release from the mayor's office after that news about the problems on the Blue Line yesterday morning.
Yes.
But, you know, this also comes after the unfair agitation by Councillor Wu and all those other candidates and officials. Right.
So this is, of course, not happening in a vacuum. And Councillor Michelle Wu is one of the ones pushing for the most dramatic thing right now, which is saying not only should there not be a fare hike, which went into effect on July 1st, but the T should be free in general. Minimally speaking, what the mayor pointed out, which is interesting, is the fixes that he's asking for, the augmentations that he's asking for, are only about 40% of the expected revenue for a few months of the fare hike, the revenue generated through the fare hike that a lot of folks were hoping would be pushed back while the T wasn't fully functional. So yes, this conversation is happening in the context of a broader question of, are we actually being served well by the MBTA right now? And also, whose responsibility is it to be fixing that? There is some question of whether or not Boston should have a seat on the board that oversees the T, but because it doesn't have one. Michelle Wu is also going a step further and saying not only should there be a Boston seat, there should be a commuter rail rider seat and a regular rider seat, and also just kind of a cycling resident seat as well. And a notable thing in that case is if that had been the situation back when the fare hike vote happened, it would have actually deadlocked the vote and the fare hikes wouldn't have gone through.
Well, and another reason why the T is a big concern is because it's probably the grid for most of the new housing growth and a lot of the job growth that's going on right now. But what about the stations? Because you mentioned in this week there's concern about JFK UMass station. There is a station there. It sort of functions. So why does it need to be better?
So one of the big things to keep in mind for JFK UMass is that it sits at this very specific point. It's right at the joint of South Boston and Dorchester. It's right below Columbia Road. It's at the intersection with an interstate. It's the main transit hub for the entirety of Columbia Point, which includes, of course, UMass Boston, which now has dorms. It's this ever-growing development boom all along this, along the Morrissey Boulevard and Mount Vernon Street corridors. So it's a pretty critical station to begin with, but also improvements to it have kind of come in fits and starts. At first, when it was first constructed, it was just to address the Ashmont line train that was coming through. Later, they added a platform, a separate platform for the Braintree train, and then, of course, they added the platform for the commuter rail train, and 4 buses stop there regularly. So it's a very specific central hub, and one of the developers I was talking to this week for a story actually called it a baby South Station. But everyone I was talking to this week to kind of gauge what should be done at JFK UMass, since there are going to be advanced signal repairs that have to happen because of the damage caused by the derailment. So they're moving forward that schedule. And there's a little bit budgeted for roof repairs at JFK UMass. But the big question is, as we move toward these new cars, as we move toward signal and track improvements, is JFK as a station actually serving people well? Does the station itself need to be upgraded? And the thing that pretty much everyone agreed on that I was talking to is, yes, they think it's in line for a new upgrade. It's kind of crumbling and not really all that pleasant to look at. And also the weirdness of the 2 platforms kind of leaves people running back and forth if they need to transfer trains at, again, the central hub. So there is an agreement that you need a new station. The question is basically when that would happen or what the funding is for it. And the other question that's interesting is whether or not it should be done in conjunction with some other kind of use, maybe housing or some other mixed use, since it's a pretty big parcel and the T is one of the bigger landowners in that area.
Another transportation corridor you wrote about this week is Blue Hill Avenue, and this is an avenue. It's one kind of street north of Grove Hall. It's another street south of Grove Hall. Talk about tell me what are people concerned about there?
So it depends. So for context, of course, what's happening is the city is embarking on a broader study for how to revitalize and revamp Blue Hill Ave, about a 3-mile stretch of it, starting in Mattapan Square and then going up all the way to Grove Hall. And so they're in the very, very early phase right now. They're starting to put out surveys online asking people, what do you want to see along this stretch? And they already, in the first month, got over 200 survey responses. So at a meeting I was covering last week, they started going through some of the basic results, and some of them were kind of striking. 70% of people that responded to just this preliminary survey had either been in an accident or knew someone who had been in an accident on Blue Hill Ave. Only 17% of respondents felt safe using the roadway. And they also, interestingly, said that the number one thing they'd like to associate with Blue Hill Avenue is clean. They'd like it to just kind of look better. And one thing that was actually striking to me, because you have 2 state representatives that kind of cover that stretch of Blue Hill Avenue, State Rep Russell Holmes and also State Rep Dan Cullinane, is they're both being asked for slightly different things from their constituents. Dan Cullinane, who's closer to the Mattapan Square side of it, says his priority, and a lot of people's priority, is just kind of the actual look of the roadway. They'd like trees, they'd like beautification, they'd like better intersections and ways to cross Mattapan Square and that surrounding area. But then as soon as you cross up into Russell Holmes's district, the joke is they have so many trees, all they have is all of this kind of green trash that now needs to be taken care of as well. So there is a lot of difference between these different stretches of the roadway, and right now is the very, very early stage where the city is asking, for people that use this stretch regularly, what do you want to see? Do you want to see biking? Do you want to see better pedestrian routes? Where should there be signal upgrades? Because some are on the way. So it's still very much the information gathering phase right now, but there will be a meeting on September 25th that will discuss the results from the study and next steps going forward.
Now, another drawback to the avenue is that if you don't have a car and you need to take the bus, you could get stuck.
Yeah, it's gridlock. Actually, one of the things that did get a bit of a rueful laugh in the meeting was a spokesman for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation who said, we'd love to improve bus service, and right now, because of the situation with gridlock, the only thing we can tell you is if your bus leaves on time, it will get stuck in traffic going up and down the avenue. So yes, there's a broader discussion right now about whether or not you should be pursuing, as a city, priority bus lanes or bus rapid transit and designated bus lanes. And so there will be a meeting in later August to kind of, they're calling it a bus learn-a-thon, to sort of brief the public on what the differences are and different bus options, so that when people are weighing in on what they'd like to see as far as that kind of core method of transportation up and down the avenue, they know what the city's talking about.
Finally, I guess the bad news is this is your last segment with us, at least
Yes.
from the Dorchester Reporter. I'm always intrigued about transplants who come here and get really dug into the neighborhoods. That happened with you. How did that happen?
Yeah, so some people know I grew up in California and then skipped over to Utah for high school and then came out here for college in 2011, and I've been here ever since. And for the past 3 years, I've lived in Dorchester. I've been working for the Reporter for 4 years, and it happened sort of naturally for me, which is a big part of my job. Involved going to community meetings almost all of the time, and what you start to see is that there's this very kind of distinct and deep care that neighbors have for their neighborhood, not just the ones that are trying to keep it the way it is, but also the ones who want to be really conscious of the way that it changes. And for me, growing up in the Bay Area, San Francisco obviously went through kind of a very dramatic, tight squeeze, and so a lot of people there feel like they don't have ownership over their city. And so it's been kind of interesting for me in Dorchester over these years to watch the push and pull between people who understand that there's a housing crunch, that more people are trying to live in the city, and also the understanding that they're in a neighborhood that's been disinvested in for a really long time, and wanting to be careful about how it grows and kind of what the character of it is. And for me, this was a new experience. I'd not lived in the same neighborhood that I actually regularly reported on before. When I was at the Globe, they would send you everywhere. And so being at the Reporter and sort of having the time to dig in and talk to the same people over and over for 4 years, it really was striking to me just how carefully people are approaching these changes.
Thank you very much, and good luck in the future.
Thank you, Chris.
Jennifer Smith from the Dorchester Reporter.